up, just write very clearly, especially email addresses. If I confuse an L with an I or one, it don't work. Email doesn't work. So please write real neat and plain on that. But I would love to send those newsletters to you. Lori's with me here this morning, but Karen is in Zambia. She never comes, hardly ever comes back to U.S. now, but she's become my right arm in a sense with Lori and me. This is kind of a family thing now. Karen's works with Karen's kids, and I'll talk about that in a second. But also, Karen's become our chief administrator there in Zambia, and she helps me in solving problems and getting things done. And like the roof blew off of the dorm the other day, and now I'm working with her how we're going to fix that, and she will have to oversee and get that done for us here before January when we got new students coming in. But I just wanted you to understand Karen's now become a very, very important part of our work in Zambia. We've been doing this for 20 years, and the church here has been partnering with us now for 20 years. Do you realize it's been that long, Ron? It's been a while now. But 20 years we've been doing this. And there's three main parts of our ministry. I'm going to focus most of my time on the Bible College because that's our primary ministry. But there's two other areas, kind of humanitarian ministries, and I want to mention them first of all. There is the primary school that Lori kind of helps take care of and oversee because she's a teacher and that's kind of her baby. And she is helping to develop that ministry. We're trying to provide good Christian education for the children in our community. That we have grades K through 7, and we're fixing to add grades 8 and 9, hopefully starting this in January with the new school year. We have capacity. It'll go up to about 300 students with grades 8 and 9. We want to provide good education, both academically and spiritual. Academically, because the government schools are very poor, so it doesn't take much to beat them, but we're trying to provide a good quality education. But then that, of course, the spiritual component, that's very important to us, and we want to try to influence the children. The Africans don't do a whole lot with children. Half of them die before they reach adulthood. Youth ministry is a ministry to single adults who, hadn't got married yet. And nobody does a whole lot with kids under 18. And that's a big oversight, not just Church of Christ, but everybody. And we think that we want our students to get practical experience working in our primary schools so that when they go back home, they'll be able to work with the children in their villages and help make a difference in developing their spiritual life. We are almost finished with our new classroom building for grades 8 and 9. In fact, I have a newer picture. It's actually done. They just finished it this past week. We have practical training because we want our Bible college students and their wives to come over and get practical experience teaching in our primary school so that they might go back to their village and start a village school in their church or work in some other community school. And earn a little income from that, or at least they'll be able to go back to the village and work with the children in the village in a spiritual way. So we want our students and their wives in the Bible college to come over and learn to work with children. We also have a meal program. We give all the children coming to our school breakfast and lunch. It doesn't cost us a lot, but according to the UN, Zambia is the most malnourished country in all of Africa, and the children coming to us, or many of them are coming from very poor families. Their parents, a lot of them work on commercial farms, and these are the poorest of the poor because they're landless people that are working on somebody else's land. And the children coming to our primary school, we noticed they're very malnourished, so we started giving them breakfast and lunch. And it made a big difference in these children. They get sick less, they're doing better academically, they seem to have more energy. They laugh and play football, soccer at recess. So that has been making a big difference. Our school is making a difference in several different ways. We're helping a lot of poor families who would not be able to send their kids to school if it wasn't for our school. We're also giving these kids a very good education that's going to equip them as they become adults to get a better job and better support their families. They're also getting a nutritious meal twice a day, which is going to, well, it's not coming up. Anyway, they're getting a nutritious meal, and that's going to enable these kids to be healthier. They're less likely to be among the 50% that die before adulthood. They'll be able to be healthier as adults, not die young, be able to support their families. And these children are getting a good Christian foundation that's going to have an influence upon them for the rest of their lives. Then there's our children's ministry, which we call Karen's Kids. This is a ministry that my daughter Karen started about 15 years ago because she saw so many of the babies dying. We knew that half the children of Zambia die before they reach adulthood, but when we really got to looking at it, we came to understand that that happens in the first 2 or 3 years of their life, mainly because something happens to the mother. The mother dies in childbirth or soon after, or the mother is too malnourished and she's not adequately able to nurse the child, or the mother has HIV/AIDS and she shouldn't nurse the child, but she will anyway because they don't have an alternative to mother nursing. They can't afford cows. You got to have a lot of land, or you got to buy feed for them, which they have neither. And that makes milk more expensive, and baby formula is $50, $60 a month, so they can't afford that. And if a mother can't adequately nurse the child, then that child's just going to get malnourished, and then comes malaria or dysentery or something, and that's why it kills so many children. The problem in Africa is not really malaria, it's malnutrition is really the real problem underlying all the premature deaths of children in Africa. And Karen does several things. One of the main things she does is provide baby formula to children for up to 2 years. She also will help children with medical. Why does this thing keep locking up? There's a reason there. She helps with medical assistance for some of the children that are sick. Sometimes they have to have an operation. And then she also will help with some of the children who have special needs. And I'm just throwing up a few pictures here of some children she's taken in recently that she's helping. Karen's Kids, we don't know exactly, but she has probably saved 300 or more babies. Literally, we never kept record of this, but pretty much she saved at least 300 or more babies who would have died. The babies she helps are healthier because they get baby formula for the first 2 years of their life. They're less likely to get sick and die premature. These babies are also able to stay with their families in the villages. We really don't think the answer is an orphanage. We think children need to be raised in the family. And then a big thing is that she helps a lot of the teenage mothers to be able to stay with their babies. One of the things does this thing need new batteries? Oh, okay. The other thing is we have a lot of teenage mothers in Africa, and the reason is because it's hard to believe, but women in most of the world do not have control of their bodies. In Zambia, it is against the law to give birth control to a woman without her husband's permission. We could get in real trouble for doing that. And it's even against the law for a woman to, on her own, take birth control without her husband's permission. And we have a lot of rape that goes on. It's against the law, but they don't do nothing about it. We had one teenage girl that got pregnant and went to the police. We knew who the guy was, and they said, well, if you'll bring the guy in and he confesses, we'll prosecute, which, don't bother us. And so, they just don't do anything about that. So we have a lot of girls that get raped. They also there's this common idea that if you have HIV/AIDS and you have relations with a girl who's a virgin, that will cure you of your HIV/AIDS. Well, that's like putting a bullseye on the back of a bunch of 12, 13, 14-year-old girls. So Karen helps a lot of teenage mothers girls that get pregnant, and tries to help them stay with their baby and sometimes finish their education. I'd say most of the people that Karen is helping are teenage girls or widowed grandmothers who are taking care of their grandkids because all her kids are dying. She's got the kids and she's not. It's a very bad situation, the grandmothers who can't take care of their young babies. The primary ministry, and I'll spend the rest of the time talking about this, is the Bible College. That's kind of the area that I focus on. You know, we got Karen with the children's ministry, Lori with the primary school, but my focus is on the Bible College more than any other area. We have a nice campus now. We're almost totally finished with our construction, but we've got a nice auditorium. It's 110 feet long by 50 feet wide. In the back, there's this huge classroom where we can do combined classes, because when I'm over there or we have a visiting teacher, we'll combine all the classes, first year, second year, third year students and their wives. So I have a nice classroom to teach in. We have a second classroom for the second year students, and then we have for the third year students a classroom that's in our office building. We also have a classroom for the women's program, because we require our married students to bring their wives, and the wives have to go through our women's program. If the wives don't come and go through the women's program, they can't come to our school. It's just a requirement because we want to train both the husband and the wife. We have 30 married student apartments. They're just simple 3 rooms, no indoor kitchen or toilets or running water. That's outside because we don't want to increase their standard of living. And then we have a dorm, which a windstorm blew the roof off about a week ago, so I got to put that back on here. But we, with capacity, because we do have some single students, but we have capacity for about 100 students. And we don't want to get any bigger than that because, you know, there's a point where you reach what is called maximum proficiency. And if you go beyond that, you actually get a decreased return. Because what we're trying to do more than anything is to develop the spiritual lives of our students. We're after quality, not quantity. When we moved from our old campus at Mapepe to our new campus at Daybreak in 2015, we went from a 2-year program to a 3-year program. We learned a lot when we were at Mapepe. And, you know, whenever you go into a ministry, it takes you time to learn. I don't care if you're a preacher here or in this country. It takes time for you to get experience how to work with that church or that ministry. And so the first 12 years at Mapepe, we learned an awful lot, so that when we moved to our new campus, we were able to change our infrastructure and redesign everything and develop a whole new program. And that is why now what we're doing at Daybreak is working so much better. We got a lot of practical experience that we were able to implement in 2015. And we went from a 2-year to a 3-year program. We now want 75% of our students. See, instead of having dorms at Mapepe, I built married students. I just built a dorm about 2 years ago. It was afterthought. I want married students. 75% of them, their wives have to come and go through our women's program. We're now recruiting older, more mature guys. We want guys that are already involved in ministry. We get recommendations from their home congregation, and then we interview the students. We want to vet them. Dennis Sabello, the director of the Bible College, told me the other day that we have 30 good students that they've already interviewed and vetted that we could bring in January, coming up here in January. But we only have room for about 17 or 18. So we're getting good quality students now that we're recruiting to come to our Bible college. And we now have a good Bible teaching faculty. These guys have been with me for quite a few years now. And when I'm in Zambia, I spend a lot of time training my teachers who do the teaching. And I've really invested a lot in developing these teachers so that they can do a good job. And we have a full-time agriculture teacher, which I'll mention why we do that in just a second. But we have had at least 750 who have graduated through our Bible college. In about 2 weeks, we'll graduate, was that a 6th or 7th graduating class from Daybreak. But the students that we're now graduating from Daybreak, they're much, much better than the students that we had graduating from Pepe. That it's like it took us 12 years to really learn how to do this right. And we've kind of reached a point now that I don't know what else to do different that would make it better. It's sort of like, you feel like you've reached your stride and you've kind of figured out and you're doing what needs to get done and it's working. The students that we now see graduating, the reports and the feedback we're getting from them is very, very good feedback that we're getting about what our graduates now are doing in ministry. What makes our school unique? And, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging or something here, and you can decide whether I'm bragging or not here. I just want you to know what we're doing is very different from I don't know anyone else who's doing what we're doing, okay? Good or bad is what I'm saying. You judge, all right? There's a lot of schools that are doing Bible colleges, but they do little more than just teach Bible and ministry. You go through, you sit in a classroom, you get all these teaching, you get a diploma, and then you go out. But I got to realizing that was not enough to really develop the kind of leaders that we need for Africa. So I don't know anyone in Churches of Christ or in denominations. I've talked to denominational missionaries that's doing what we're doing. But here's what we're doing. We are really focused on, our number one priority is to develop the spiritual life and character of the students. And I realized that involves a lot more than knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that other schools aren't trying to develop the spiritual life of the students, but they're relying pretty much solely upon classroom teaching. And I came to realize it takes more than just classroom teaching. Our mission statement is to train and develop self-supporting spiritual leaders who are equipped for holistic rural ministry. Now, there's 3 parts to that. We want to train them to be self-supporting. I'll talk about that in a second. We want to train them and equip them so they can do holistic ministry, meaning minister both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. And most importantly, by far most important part of it, is that we want to develop spiritual leaders for the churches. And that's really the bottom line. If we don't do anything else right, that's the one thing we want to make sure that we do right. That's the thing I'm focusing most on and judging our effectiveness is how well our students doing as they graduate as far as being spiritual leaders for the churches. So what that really comes down to mean is our number one focus is on what's called spiritual formation, or more accurately, really, spiritual transformation. And so it's taken me 15 years I've been studying, trying to figure out how you do this. 15 years we've come up with about 7 or 8 things that I think are essential components to developing the spiritual life of a leader. And I don't have time to go through all this, but there's, of course, Bible. I don't want to underemphasize the importance of teaching Bible because it's essential. Without a knowledge of the Bible, there'll be no spiritual growth, okay? But if that's all you're doing, I think it will work for some people. If they just hear the word, boom, they just grow spiritually. But my experience, that's not the norm. It's not even the norm here in America based on my experience in ministry. I think something more is needing. I think you need to take what you learn and in the classroom and you need to get out there and put it into practice as soon as possible. Practical application. Otherwise, you become hearers of the word and not doers of the word. And so our students are going off every weekend, Saturdays and Sundays, going in, doing ministry, the whole 3 years that they're with us. Then there's also mentoring, one-on-one. You got to sit down with someone and have these discussions about what are you learning in the classroom? How is that affecting you? What changes does that imply that you need to make in your life? What are you going to do about it? Are you doing what you want to do? And pray with them and work with them one-on-one to help people to digest and make personal, the things that they're learning in the classroom, and provide a little accountability for them. And then there's worship. People have got to develop, you've got to help people to develop that personal relationship with God, public and private worship, what we might call the devotional life, your relationship with God. You've got to help people to work on that relationship with God, because the tendency is that people make Christianity a ritualistic religion instead of a relational religion with God. And you've got to really emphasize that. I wish I had more time to talk about that, but we've designed our ministry to try to accomplish those 7 or 8 things. Second of all, we're unique in, although I wouldn't say we're alone in this, because there are now a lot more Bible colleges in Africa that are starting to train their students with some kind of practical skill that they could become self-supporting when they graduate. But we believe you've got to train them to be self-supporting. That's part of our mission statement because it is so important. And we're training our students in agriculture. And the reason we're doing this is Africa cannot afford full-time preachers. That is an American idea that we exported to Africa. The thing is, you know, we didn't really have that many full-time ministers here in America, especially Churches of Christ, until after World War II. Most of them were self-supporting. You have to have prosperity to hire full-time guys, and it costs a lot. They can't afford that in Africa, and we certainly don't want them on American support. That's a really bad idea. I could talk for 2 or 3 days on that one. All right? And so you don't want them to be a burden to their churches, but yet we've set up Bible colleges and trained them and they go through our schools with the expectations they're going to get supported by a church when they graduate, and they get out in a church and the church can't afford them. And you know what they do? They start preaching about giving all the time. I'll tell you what, in Africa, half the sermons I hear are about money and about giving. You know, that 2 Corinthians passage, give so God will bless you, which is an abuse of that passage. So we're training our guys in agriculture. We teach them basic agriculture, which includes crop rotation and composting and a lot of other things, but especially the use of drip irrigation, because that's the most economical use of water. In Zambia, it only rains about 4 or 5 months out of the year, and then we don't get a drop for 7 months. But you can grow food year-round if you have water. Temperature doesn't change much. The trouble is rain. And they have to walk 3 or 4 or 5 miles to get their water. But if they can get enough water to fill 3 or 4 buckets every day, they can more than adequately feed their family and even have some left over to sell and earn a little money from that. When our students come, we give them a plot of land. We have 50 acres, so we give them a little plot of land. We show them how to do this. It's practical training. Everything we do, you got to have practical training to it. You don't just in a classroom. You got to do it. And we also, after I feed them for about 2 or 3 months, but when their vegetables start producing, then I cut the support, and they're on their own. You know, it's kind of sink or swim here. And we have some guys, you know, we have 2 or 3 every year that just disappear overnight. They decide they don't want to work that hard. We get rid of the chaff that way. But they got to be self-supporting for the 3 years that they're with us. And that's how we know that they're going to be self-supporting when they leave us, because they were self-supporting for 3 years when they were with us. And they mastered the skills, and they can go back home and be able to support themselves. We also teach them how to do chickens and poultry and other things, rabbits and things like that they can do. And then we're training our students in holistic ministry. We want them to minister both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. We're doing that because one reason is Jesus did that. He came preaching and ministering both to the physical and the spiritual needs of people. But in Africa, you can't ignore the physical needs of people. Poverty is so deep. In Africa, if your religion doesn't do something with the here and now, it's worthless. So, you know, we can't ignore that side of it. Now, the way that we train our students to do holistic ministry, both spiritual and the physical, is by, and I keep saying this, practical experience. You got to take what you learn in the classroom and get out there and start doing it. And so our students, every Saturday and Sunday, they're going out by walking or by bicycle, go out in the surrounding villages, and they learn how to build a relationship, because we're not teaching them just teach people what to do to be baptized. That's easy in Africa. You can do that in a week. That's very easy in Africa. The real hard thing is to help someone to come to understand what it really means to be a Christian, and then to make some major changes in their life. Transformation is the hard work in Africa. I call this disciple making. We don't talk about evangelism, because that's kind of narrow way it's been used. We talk about making disciple. And if you're going to make a disciple, it begins by building a relationship with people. So we teach them. You go in the village, you start serving. You go out, you find a widow's house whose roof is leaking, and you rethatch it for her. You find someone who is sick and they can't harvest or tend to their crops. You plant or harvest or to help them with their crops. You walk 5 miles to buy medicine for them when they're sick and pray with them. Help a guy fix his bicycle. Just learn to serve. That's a big part of, first of all, and then that will eventually lead you into sitting down when you've built trust and you've built a relationship. Now you can begin to share with them from the Bible, from the Word of God, and then after they're baptized, you can continue to work with them as they have to make some major changes in the way that they're living. Because you see, our real problem in Africa is that people, they become a Christian and they think being a Christian is going to church to make God happy with them, so He'll bless them. I find people walking out of church in Africa all the time, walk out and they're like, God is going to bless me. Well, I ask, why do you say that? Well, because I went to church today. We put money in the collection plate. We took the Lord's Supper. We sang, God is happy with me and He is going to bless me. See, they went through the ritual. Yeah, but what about this woman over here that ain't your wife? Or what about, the fact that you are taking bribes? And what about, you're dishonest in your business, using weights that aren't true? Yeah, but I went to church today. God is going to bless me. You see the problem? We don't have that problem here, do we? Well, it's really obvious in Africa. So we're trying to teach them that it involves a major change in the way you live your life. And it's about a relationship with God. And then we teach them agriculture, not only so they can support themselves, but also so that they can go back to the village and they can teach others how they can grow food for themselves using drip irrigation. And that's how we really solve the problem of malnutrition in Africa, is that if we can teach people how to grow their own food, especially during the dry season in those parts of Africa where they don't get a lot of rain. We're also teaching them how to be a school teacher and how to work with children. As I've already mentioned, they get practical, emphasize that, practical, hands-on experience teaching and working with the children in our primary school. We teach them how to work with vulnerable children and orphans. They learn from Karen's kids about how to do that. We're teaching them basic medicine. There's a lot, preventive medicine, but a lot of things that you can do for people when they're sick, using herbs and other things, and help diagnose some of the things that ail people. And then we do a lot in marriage and the family as well, because in Africa, they've gone from arranged marriages that were stable to where they've been influenced by Hollywood and Coca-Cola, and now they want love and romance in their marriages. So, if you study the history of marriage, you go back about 300 or 400 years in this, even in Western culture, the idea that someone would marry for love and romance was almost thought to be kind of unethical, just kind of immoral. Today, it's the other thing. We think if people got married for any other reason than for love, that would be unseemly, right? But 400 years ago, people married for survival and for land and union of families and other reasons, and it didn't have a lot to do with love. It didn't have nothing to do with love and romance. In fact, a lot of times they didn't even know each other before they get married hardly. So they used to have stable marriages. Well, now they want love and romance as well. Low expectation to high expectations, see? If you want love and romance in your marriage, you're going to have to learn some relational skills. And Africans the men still treat women like they're a cow. You know, the word for marry in most African languages is the same word as to buy. I buy a tomato, I buy a cow, I buy a wife. I marry, same thing, okay? And, you know, most all the way through Africa, if the woman doesn't do what you want, just beat her till she does. And men treat their wives like they're a slave. And let me tell you, women can give it back too, okay? So it's just more covert. So, you know, we got a lot of problems with marriage. So we do a lot in teaching, a lot of preventive marriage, kind of how you build good relationships. How do you love a wife or love a husband? And we hope they'll go back and maybe they'll teach the next younger generation and they can have better marriages. Because, boy, right now they're having, I wish I had more time to tell you some of the horror stories of, you think it's bad here? Well, boy, I tell you, it gets worse. It really does. All right, so we're training our students to do both spiritual and holistic ministry, which is according to our mission statement. So I think you understand that training that we're doing involves a whole lot more than just what you do in a classroom. And that's kind of what makes us different from any other school that I know, is all the work that we do outside the classroom. And that's why I have a bigger staff than I need. Because if I was doing a classroom, I could use half of them, that many. But I tell my teachers, the most important work you're going to do is not in a classroom, it's what you're going to do outside the classroom with the students when you're with them. Now, people ask me, how well are your students doing after they graduate? And I may not get through all this, I got to watch my time. But here's Lazarus, a 2019 graduate, working down in the eastern province, DBC, Daybreak Bible College. We're located kind of in the middle of the country. And so he's working over in the eastern part of the country. He is doing gardening and poultry and teaching that to the members in the church. Crispin, graduate in 2020. He and his wife were two of the most spiritual-minded students. He's very evangelistic. He is working for a church down in the southern province. The church he's working with, it almost died. It was started many years ago, but it almost died. He went back and started working with it, and now they've grown up to about 100 members, and he sent this picture to show us how the church is doing. He supports himself through gardening and chickens and rabbits, and he's also teaching the church to do the same. King Soko, 2020 graduate, working out in the Eastern Province, actively involved in evangelism, supports himself through the agriculture that we taught him. He writes and says, much thanks to the donors for the godly support that they rendered to me who want to serve God and win the lost. I am who I am today because God used you to support Daybreak Bible College. May God abundantly continue to bless the donors so that they can bless others. Moffat, 2020 graduate, working for a church way out in a remote part of Zambia up against the Malawi border. Very, talk about being out in the sticks. This is way out there, a very remote, poor part of the country, but he's actively involved in evangelism and reports the church there is also growing quite well. He supports himself through this gardening and planning to start raising rabbits. He writes and says that he never thought he would become a minister for God when he started at Daybreak, but he says that he became a totally transformed person. And that's the key word I want to see our students talk about. By the way, if you were to interview any of our students, and I say this because we do interview them after when they're graduating, and the word I'm looking for is I want to hear them use the word transformed. And I'm telling you, if you were to sit down with our students, you would hear them use that word a lot. And they talk about how they're going to go back and they're going to transform the lives of other people. That's the number one word I'm looking for, transformation. It's not about going to church and going through the ritual. It's about a changed life. But anyway, he says, I became a totally transformed person at Daybreak and wants to do the same for others by helping them to know who God is and his mission. Meshach, a graduate from 2020. He is from the northern province, but right now he's working for a church down in Mazabuka. He is training his members in his church in drip irrigation. He is helping the church to grow, and that church now has started a building program to build a larger church building. He writes and says, "I'm no longer the same Meshach people used to know before I attended Daybreak, but a transformed person. I've learned to love God and how to love others." Meshach told me one day, he says, he came back and says, "I went home and the people said, 'You're not the same Meshach. Who are you?'" That's the way he put it. And I thought, yeah, if they can see it, then, something's happening here that good. Roderick, graduate from 2020. He's been teaching in a Bible college, kind of a Zambian self-started college up in the northern province. He's involved in a prison ministry. He preaches on the radio, and that radio goes over the whole of Zambia. He is actively involved in evangelism. He's one of our most capable students and graduates, and he is planning to go to Christian college down in Swaziland, South Africa, basically. And when he finishes there with a 4-year degree in Bible, I'm hoping to hire him to be one of our teachers in the future. Doubt, 2021 graduate. He is preaching for a church down in the southern province. He said that was his home congregation. He came to Daybreak for 3 years, and he said that while he was at Daybreak, the church almost died, so he went back and he started an evangelism discipleship program and strengthened the church, and the church has started growing, and they've now started a building program, and he supports himself through drip irrigation and teaching the members how to use the agriculture he learned as well. Martin Kashimbe, 2020 graduate from Manzai, but recently he moved to work up in the Copperbelt, where we have very few churches of Christ. He's working up there with another graduate of ours named Paul Njovu. He graduated in 2018, working up there in the Copperbelt, does a lot of work with youth, in other words, single adults, and he is a very hard-working man. He's thriving on the agriculture. He's becoming quite well off, actually, because he's a very hard-working guy, and he's been out there since one of our earlier graduates from Daybreak, and he's really doing very well up in Copperbelt. Patrick Lungu, 2020 graduate. He's involved in a lot of counseling, some kind of ministry, does a lot of counseling. He's very active in a group that's going out doing evangelistic campaigns. I hear from him. He's up here, and then he's over there, and then he's all over Zambia doing campaigns. He's really gotten into campaign. But when he's not involved in evangelistic campaigns, he's working with a church down in Manzai. Oberti, 2020 graduate, planted a church down in Livingston. That's where Victoria Falls is at, if you know where that is. And Lucas Bonda, 2019 graduate, planted a new church over in the eastern province. And you kind of see in the background there the church. That's the way a lot of churches start. They basically get tree limbs or thin trees with straw grass, and that's kind of how they construct their churches there. But he started a new church over in the eastern province. And then about 3-4 years ago, our students at Daybreak went to a village at Shimabala, 7 miles away from us, and they've started a church there. And the students get to go there on Sundays and lead in worship and work in that ministry around that area. It's a growing little marketplace there on the main highway, about 7 miles from our campus. So that's kind of our 3 main ministries. We have other things I don't have time to get into, like our optical clinic that Lori does when she's there, where we can give prescription eyeglasses to people. And there's some other little things we do, but you see that's kind of the ministry we're involved with. Again, let me remind you to be sure to sign up for our newsletter. Now, I want to close with this last thought here, and that is, why is it so important that we be training spiritual leaders for Africa? Why is what we're doing so important? And why do I probably end up doing this till the day I can't physically keep doing it? As you may or may not know, the gravitational center of Christianity has moved from the Western hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. In missions, everything you see written these days is all about the global south, is what they call it, because that's where Christianity is really growing right now. There are 700 million people in Africa now that profess to be Christians. That's more than any other continent in the world. South America would come in second, but we largely got Catholic there. But Africa's really, when you're thinking about Protestant Christianity, that is where it has moved. There are more Christians that live in Africa than any other continent now. There are twice as many people that attend church in Africa than attend church in all of North America and Europe combined. There are now more members of the Church of Christ and more churches of Christ in Africa than there are here in the United States, according to Christian Chronicle about 4, 5, 6 years ago. So when you're thinking about what does a Church of Christ member look like now? He don't look like you and me anymore. He's African, if anything. The world's changed. They're telling us that by 2050, 27 years from now, that there's going to be 1.3 billion people in Africa professing to be Christian. That's going to be almost twice as many as any other continent. So you see, Christianity has just exploded in Africa. And that's why I went to Africa, because of that reason. That's where it's really happening, where, great growth is happening. Well, the problem is too much growth too fast is a serious problem. What would happen to McDonald's if they doubled every 5 years? They couldn't train enough managers and assistant managers and the logistics and all. They couldn't do it. And they're just brick and mortar. We're a spiritual ministry trying to change people's life and their worldview. That's a whole lot harder. You see, it is a real serious problem when you grow too fast. So we got churches all over Africa now. And yeah, they got leaders. They just aren't very good leaders. I mean, they're immoral and they don't know what it's really about. And they sure don't know the Bible. And so that's a real problem. How do you train enough spiritual leaders, good leaders, for all these new churches all over Africa? That is the problem we have. And that's why I believe that training leaders for Africa is the most important thing that we need to be doing in the world right now. And I'm telling you this for a couple other reasons. So let me take one step further this. They hear what's going on in America. And when I'm in Africa, they ask me things like, are gays, they don't call them gays, they call them homosexuals. Are homosexuals becoming members and you're accepting them into churches in America? Where did you hear that? Yeah. Are homosexuals becoming pastors in the churches in America and Europe? Yeah. Are men becoming women and women becoming men? Yeah. And they look at me like, it's like, they think we've gone bananas. I mean, I can't tell you how it's like, you got to be kidding me. They can't believe it. And then they say, well, one day we're going to be sending missionaries to America. And I said, I think the way we're going, you probably are right. We're going to need them. Maybe right now we need them. I'm glad you're talking that way. I don't like hearing it, but I'm glad you're thinking that way, because I want to tell you something. There are far, far more African missionaries right now than there are American missionaries. There's my 5-minute warning. All right, I'll wrap it up here. There are far more African missionaries than there are. I was talking to Everett Huffer the other day, and I said, last I heard there was like 70 full-time missionaries from the Churches of Christ that have been doing mission work 3 years longer. And he said, I think that number is too high. Folks, there's a lot of African missionaries. There's more than you can count. They're leaving their homes and crossing tribal boundaries and going into other countries. There's far more African missionaries today than there are American missionaries. So what does an American missionary, what does a missionary in your Church of Christ look like? He don't look like me anymore. Okay? Here's something else why I think this is so important. You're aware of all the immigration that's going into Europe, right? You've probably heard of this. Pakistanis and Indians have been going in huge numbers for 50, 60, 70 years. That's been time. But now in the last 15, 10, 15, 20 years, we're getting lots of Middle Easterners going into Europe, especially the Syrians from the Syrian war there. And you're hearing about them, and Germany's welcoming them, as well as the other European countries. Do you know why they're welcoming the immigrants? Because in Europe, they're experiencing what's called the birth dirge. In other words, they're not having enough children. Their population is old, and now they don't have enough people to be doctors and nurses and plumbers and electricians, or even work at the 7-Eleven around the corner. They need these immigrants to do all these jobs that they don't have young people to do anymore. And so what has happened is you don't hear about this, but there are huge numbers of Africans that are going into Europe now. Now, Africa is complaining, and they're saying, they call it the brain drain. You're stealing our best and brightest. We're training doctors and nurses, and you're stealing them off to Europe. And they're complaining to Europe, you're hurting us. Well, you don't blame these people wanting to move to Europe and get a better job and better lifestyle and all that. But it's hurting Africa because there's huge numbers that are moving into Europe from Africa. Now, there are 700 million people in Africa that profess to be Christians. Now, what do you think's happening when they get to Europe? You can go into Europe, if any of you have ever been to some of these big, beautiful museums. They used to be called churches. I've been there several times. I drop off on my way to and from Africa and go to these places. Anytime I'm in one of these, they're beautiful. I always find a janitor or someone working in a bookstore, and I'll say, is there a church that still meets here? And most of the time they go, oh, no, there's no church that meets here. Sometimes I've had them say, well, yeah, I think there's a group that meets over there in the wing and on Sunday mornings down in the basement. That's what's happened to Christianity in Europe. It's died. You may not be aware, but less than 4% of Europe goes to church on Sunday. If it wasn't for Catholics in Spain, France, and Italy, it'd be less than 1%. Christianity died in Europe. But hey, we got all these Africans moving up to Europe, and what are they doing? They're starting churches all over Europe. They're reseeding. They're missionaries. They're starting churches all over Europe. Now, they're in homes. They don't build a lot of churches, but you go to the museums and, big, beautiful churches. You walk out and you go down a block or two, you might see a church in a shopping center that an African has started, but more than likely, they're all in home churches. They're starting all over Africa. I was in Athens, Greece a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, visiting the missionary there in Athens, and I found out that half the church in Athens now are Africans. And the missionary told me, I don't even know where all the others are. They're in house churches all over Athens, and I don't even know, I've not even met them. In other words, the numbers of Church of Christ members in Athens are mostly Africans. The European is almost a minuscule part of the church in Athens now. The church, they're reseeding Christianity in Europe. And one day, they may be coming here and reseeding Christianity in this country, and our great-great-grandchildren may be blessed because they brought the gospel back to America, the way we're headed. I want to close with this last thought. I don't want you to be discouraged. We see the way our country is going spiritually, and it probably bothers you like it bothers me deeply. I mean, I've had to stop watching the news. I can't take it anymore. I don't watch any news. Can't take it. It just upsets me. I can't sleep at night. But I don't want you to be discouraged because Christianity is not on the decline. You need to understand what's going on in the rest of the world. Christianity is exploding. Now think about what's happening in the last 100 years. Christianity 100 years ago, it was mainly a European and American religion. Today, it's global. It's everywhere. And I dare say there's not hardly anyone in the world today who hasn't heard the name Jesus Christ. That's right. And there's not hardly anywhere in the world that they can't, maybe some of the Muslim countries that can't get a hand on a Bible, they can get on the internet. But the idea that there's unreached people in the world today is almost nil. Christianity is growing. And folks, God will take care of the Western world again. They may see it a little discouraging in our backyard right now, but Christianity, the kingdom of God is growing. Be encouraged. Do not be discouraged. Thank you all for helping to support us in this work in Zambia.